Let's continue our exploration of what's it like to adopt a child. Module 4 focuses on what you've probably been dreaming about parenting. In this module, we'll discuss what parenting an adopted child looks like. This course is presented and created by the coaches at Growing Intentional Families Together to help you grow a happier, healthier adoptive family. Hi there, it's Coach Susan again, and I'll be guiding you through this module, Parenting an Adopted Child, the basics. Let's get started. You already have some knowledge and thoughts about adoption. This module will present a lot of information. Some of it will expand your understanding of adoption. Some of it may totally contradict what you currently think about adoption. You will probably have to unlearn as much as you learn. I ask that you keep your mind open. One of the presuppositions that our culture believes is that love is all it takes. In fact, when my husband and I adopted our first son, I admit I was thinking, and naively so, what more can you do but to love a child deeply? And of course, we were confident our love would translate to all the things good and loving parents do. I think we know then, as most of us know now, deep in our bones, that love is necessary but not sufficient. In adoptive families, it is especially true. Love is the seed that gives rise to the nurturing relationship in which parents grow their children. And children also need the same basics needed by, all children: food, shelter, clothing, education, discipline, and health care. And since the adoptive relationship does not arise from an intrinsic shared biological connection, the mutual bond requires a high degree of commitment to the truth. In this image, three aspects of truth sharing are highlighted: truth seeking, truth telling, and truth speaking. Let's briefly look at what distinguishes the three. Truth seeking. This refers to gathering and retaining as much factual information about the child, their birth parents, and their first families. Think beyond the basics of height, weight, career, and education. Also include information about medical history, family patterns, important highlights across their generational past, music preferences, hobbies, schooling, and favorite perfumes, books, and activities, plus any unique habits like finger tapping, hair twirling, or nail biting. While this may seem insignificant to you, research has proven that they are considered golden pearls by adoptees. Another vital aspect of truth seeking is genuinely welcoming your child's thoughts, feelings, concerns arising from their adoption and first their relinquishment. It is an act of trust on their part and an act of love on the parent's part. Many adoptive parents have difficulty initially seeing why this gathering of information matters because they fear it might create a gap between themselves and their children. Actually, the opposite is true. The information gathering is valued as an act of validation and affection. Okay, so let's look at another component: truth telling. Once you've gathered all of this information and have put it in a safe place, it's important to share it in an age appropriate words and age appropriate times. Information sharing should be completed by adolescence. I've included an excellent book on this subject called Telling the Truth to Your Adopted or Foster Child. You'll find it under this module's references list. Finally, there is the truth speaking. This aspect of truthing centers on being a voice that speaks up on behalf of adoptees. For example, not tolerating adoption being the butt of insulting or sarcastic humor. interrupting offensive comments about your children's birth families, and ensuring that any promises made to an expectant mother are accurate and grounded in your heart. At Growing Intentional Families Together, we talk a lot about adoption attunement. It's a way of parenting that can be viewed as transformational because it has a deep commitment to holding the best interest of the adopted child, at its core. Adoption attuned parenting is deeply committed to accepting that adoption is far more complex than the happily ever after win win view that our culture often lifts up. Adoption attunement parenting is courageous because it accepts that adoption is not a fairy tale and parents still choose it with their eyes open to a more honest and nuanced understanding. It validates the child's genuine experiences and stands with them arm in arm, toe to toe, being a team that can face this life together. As we move through this module, notice the child centric adoption attuned points. We've all heard people say, if only there was a handbook. Well, when it comes to handling the unique challenges of adoptive parenting, we've created the next best thing: adoption attunement parenting practices. Here's the adoption attunement list of 18 important elements. Now, I'm not going to address each element point by point in this module, but rather I'll mention many of them as I move through this module, and I'll highlight them specifically as aspects of adoption attunement parenting practices. One of the most important roles of a parent is to build attachment to their child. It's understandable then that at the core of child centric adoption attuned parenting is building connection. This photograph illustrates a quote from a PACE's Connection article. Caring is more than just being cozy and warm. It's also essential to a baby's developing brain. The familiar jouncy movement of being carried by a walking mother provides a newborn both familiar comfort and mental stimulation. It further connotes presence and thus it also boosts attachment. And in one study, the Pace Connection blog noted simply providing a soft carrier to at risk new moms and telling them to use it daily doubled the rate of secure attachment in their kids. So, adoption attuned parents will be looking to build connection, to build attachment. DNA is a blueprint of potential. In the nature versus nurture argument, adoptive parents need to remember that genetics matter. If we think metaphorically, biology is like the hardware of a child's body. Parental nurturing is akin to the apps we install on a computer, as well as which apps we use, how often we use them, and how often we update them. Two identical computers will perform vastly differently depending on what is installed and who is operating it. Adoption attuned parents will nurture and value a child's innate talents and encourage them to be themselves. Perhaps you know some families that seem to have significant patterns that have come down through the generations. Those might be occupations, hobbies, behaviors like taking care of others, high energy levels, or the need for solitude and quiet, or sociability. It is unlikely that these patterns will be followed naturally by your adopted child. Remember that he or she also is the product of a legacy of generational patterns and preferences. Being open to a child's innate talents can be expanded to include appreciating a child's birth heritage. This means more than celebrating Kwanzaa, Cinco de Mayo, Chinese New Year, or any other culture that your child has inherited from their birth family. Integrate your child's culture as part of your family's traditions. Learn as much as you can about your child's people, their traditions, foods, holidays, even beliefs. Blend it into your family's life. Build a family library that features your child's ethnicity and culture. Choose toys and other objects that represent your child's heritage. You may want to create spaces in your home that feature the heritages of each family member. This is one way to show that every person in the family is valued and loved for whom they are. Also, for children who are biracial or multiracial, recognize each one as important in your child's life. As your child gets older, he or she may identify with one culture more than the other. Until then, make all options available and let him or her know that all are accepted and valued. By integrating your child's birth heritage, your child will feel connected to their birth culture. Plus, he'll feel that his adoptive family values and respects all parts of him or her, the parts that originated with the birth family and the parts that stem from his or her adoptive family. Another important adoption attuned principle is showing respect for birth parents and first families. It's helpful to remember that without their birth parents, your children would not exist. They conceived your child and you get to raise them. At the minimum, your child's birth parents are present in their DNA. Respecting birth parents means talking about them with compassion as well as accountability. When your child sees you being respectful about their birth parents, your child will also feel valued and respected. If your child experienced neglect or abuse by his birth parents, you can help him or her to find a way to hold a multi-dimensional view of their birth parents, one that acknowledges their birth parents' damaging behavior, but still identifies something positive about them. Your child will come to understand that his birth parents can be both a cause of pain and a source of some of the aptitudes and talents and other good things that lie within your child. Help your child to separate their bad parent choices and behavior from the flawed human being who created them and whose genes exist in their bodies. This will help them to be able to accept that part of themselves that comes from their birth parents. Another important point of adoption attuned parenting is to model, teach, and hold healthy boundaries. Boundaries are the guardrails in the social interactions of life. They define what is okay and what is not okay in any given moment. They help us feel safe, which is the first thing that parents want for their kids and kids want for themselves. This goes far beyond physical safety. Kids must feel safe emotionally and psychologically as well. Remember that adoptees report fear of abandonment and rejection as one of the most common emotions they experience. This fear has an impact on how they perceive themselves and how safe they feel in voicing their own boundaries openly and freely. An adopted, attuned parent will want to teach their child three distinct aspects about boundaries: how to set them, how to hold them, and how to respect them. You know, your child's story is deeply personal and it belongs to them. None of us, including our adopted children, want the details of our personal story to be the fodder for gossip. When people learn that you have adopted, they'll be happy for you and they'll be full of questions about the adoption process, the cost, the requirements, and why he or she needed to be adopted. It's almost automatic to want to hear the answer to any of these questions posed. You feel happy, excited, and proud. You want people to be warm and empathetic towards your child. This often leads to oversharing, which can lead to criticism and sometimes rejection of your child. This is the opposite of what you intended. Information, especially anything that we might call juicy, are the kind of details people almost always remember. Others do not need and should not have the details of your child's personal story. Keep in mind that in this digital age, it's particularly important that such personal private details never be shared online. Put yourself in your child's shoes and imagine how it would feel if your personal family secrets and maybe things that they didn't want out there in the world were being shared. Adoptions occur because the child and his or her birth parents faced difficult circumstances. That's a given. So there will always be difficult, perhaps even tragic events in an adopted child's pre adoptive life. That's actually true for an infant adoption as well. As we said, these are facts that should remain private. As the years pass and you face difficulties as a family, as every family does, you will be glad that you honored your child's right to privacy. Parents who were not vigilant often find that people will use the information to judge your child harshly or his birth family negatively. It will color how they see, value, and interact with him. Finally, before you share any information with family, friends, teachers, or anyone else, be absolutely sure that's in your child's best interest for that person to know. Sometimes sharing is not helpful. Expectations and reality. We all know that a canyon can exist between the two, right? Before we adopt, it's natural for us to dream about the child who will join us. We delight in imagining the love we will have for them, the relationships we'll build, and how we'll help them grow into healthy, happy people who bring us joy, who bring joy to themselves, to us, to the world. However, sometimes those expectations can get cast in stone, and parents find it difficult to update their idea of the child of our dream to make space for the real child that's before them. Consider Wayne Dyer's words. Love is the ability and willingness to allow those that you care for to be what they choose for themselves without any insistence that they satisfy you. The reality of raising children, especially adopted children, is that they will never match our fantasy children. They will always be different. They will always grow to be their unique selves. The adoptive parent's job is to ensure that they nurture the actual gifts and talents that their child possesses. If not, neither child nor parent will be fulfilled. The child will chafe at the confines of expectation, and their genuine self will be hidden under layers of shape shifting. Two forces come into play here: fear of being rejected by another family and the human need for connection and belonging. These needs will pressure them to prioritize their parents' expectations over their own natural talents. This is sad on two fronts. The child doesn't fully bloom into the full capacity of their gifts and the parents never get to know the authentic child hiding behind the charade. So, bottom line is, we must ensure that our child's dream is genuinely their dream and not their interpretation of what they believe our dream is for them. Continuing on with some of the basics of parenting an adopted child, educating others is an important part of the responsibilities of every adoptive parent. Some approaches you might use are giving a relative or friend an online subscription to, say, an Adoptive Families Today magazine. Or you might want to host a watch party for NBC's This Is Us television series, all about adoption and living as an adoptive family. Another idea is to create a book club and read books related to adoption, such as The Seven Core Issues of Adoption or The Open Hearted Way to Adoption. Another way that you can educate others in your family, especially the younger family members, about adoption would be to give them books such as ABC, Adoption and Me, or We're Adopted, So What? Written by Coach Gail and her adult daughter, Casey Swift. My point is that educating others to see what we see as adoptive parents, as what we experience as adoptees, that's an important role that you've taken on when you've adopted your child. Using positive adoption language is also important in parenting an adopted child. Recognize too that our adoptees can say anything they want about it since it's their experience. It's important to realize that as you take your adoption journey, so too will your child. And sometimes your experiences will overlap and sometimes not. Of course, you'll help them to shape it, to understand it, to incorporate it into who they are in the healthiest, most age appropriate way. But in the end, it is their journey. Here is an example of positive versus unsanitized languaging styles. Positive strives to be sensitive to a child's feelings and to remove any negative undertones, versus unsanitized retains the weight of the complex emotions involved in adoption and the adoption process. Let's look at a few examples of the difference between positive adoption language and unsanitized language. Birth child versus real child. Birth parent or first parent versus real parent. Planned an adoption versus gave away, gave up, didn't want. Here's one: adoption triad or constellation versus adoption triangle. Was adopted versus is adopted. Here's a new one. Instead of talking about a closed adoption, PAL or positive adoption language is beginning to talk about adoption in terms of traditional or confidential adoption. Terminate parents' rights versus taken away. Parent or raise a child versus keep a child. And rather than unwanted child, you would say a child in need of a family. Research has revealed that adopted children think about their birth parents and first families whether or not they speak those wanderings out loud. When adoptive parents practice planting conversation seeds, their children benefit significantly and the parent-child bond is strengthened because it helps the child to feel deeply seen and heard. For example, Here's one way I might do it if my child loved running and I knew that it didn't come from my side of the family. I could say, "Hey, I see you really enjoy running. I wonder if your birth parents enjoyed running too." Or a similar example, "Boy, you are so good at Legos. Do you think your birth parents like building things too?" The benefit of doing this to you and your child is actually multi layered. You convey that you welcome conversations about their birth parents and family of origin. And two, the parents demonstrate that they notice and value this aspect of the child. And this is really important because sometimes children have a particular aptitude or skill that is different or rare in the adoptive family. So the child hears that his differences are as appreciated as much as the ways in which he is similar to the adoptive parent. Another thing is that you're sending a clear message that they love, that you love and accept your child for himself. And that helps to allay any fear of rejection. Although the old adage says, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me," we all know the truth that contradicts this old saw. Some words cut to the core, flay the spirit, and destroy self esteem. Once spoken and heard, such toxic words cannot be taken back, unheard, or forgotten. Forgiveness may follow, but the memory of such verbal poison and the emotional message they convey will linger. The scar will remain as a permanent memory of a painful experience. So, when we're talking to our adopted children, we want to make sure that we don't say things that we really don't mean but can't take back. You may hear, "You're not my real mother," but you will never say, you aren't my real child." We've been talking about parenting your adopted child, but your child's story began long before you adopted them. Prenatal environment matters, and it has lifelong repercussions. One of the ways that adoptive parents can honor this idea that a child's story begins before his or her birth is to preserve the facts of a child's life in life books. Life books are truthful and as complete as possible, and it would start with the child's birth. It would mention birth parents and first families. It would go on to honor the child's experiences. It would ground the child in their own story, how they came to your family, for example. And it would affirm the value of a child and his story. How adoptive parents tell the story of how they became a family matters. Metaphors color how the facts are received. When adoptive parents narrate a story of rescue, this can lock the child and parents in a savior/victim dyad. No one else enjoys feeling like someone else's project. So be honest, don't make things up, be age appropriate, and of course, share the wonder and magic of having that child first come into your life. Shared at age appropriate intervals and in language a child can understand, it is the truth that will provide them freedom. Instead of worrying about every possibility, terrible, magic, or something in between, they only need to handle what is actually true, whether it's harsh or easy, whether it's their story, their truth, or their burden to carry. Ronald Needham, assistant professor of pastoral care at Calvin Seminary, writes, quote, knowing their stories, no matter how painful the story may be, is liberating in a way that sets adoptees free to truly be themselves. But the knowing does not come without the hurting. Thus, the need to know the facts does not render difficult information painless. Adoptees need support as they labor to incorporate the elements of their personal story. So, in one of our own blogs, entitled When the Truth is Ugly, Painful, and/or Sad, it's noted that some children come to adoption, of course, because of tragic circumstances. Such circumstances hold the power to hurt our children. However, time has shown that withholding facts actually damages children even more. So it's not a matter of if parents will tell, but when and how. Now, when sharing difficult information, of course, you'll consider the child's age and maturity. You'll gradually share facts in a way that ensures the core truth. You won't be telling him or her something that must be later retracted. In the face of these kind of painful realities, a child must be able to count on parents as consistent truth tellers. Discovering that parents have lied to them destroys a child's most important sanctuary. And, it undercuts the connection that you've been trying to build. In addition to confronting extremely challenging information, the child has to face these facts without the bedrock of parents whom he trusts. So everything a parent has said, shared, and advocated becomes tainted. Now, some parents I make up may question the sanity of sharing every ugly piece of their child's story. Two scholars have written about this in an excellent book called Telling the Truth to Your Adopted or Foster Child. This reluctance is explored in great depth. A frequent reason parents offer for their decision to withhold information from their child is a desire to protect him or her. Inevitably, this attempt to shelter backfires because kids can sniff out secret keeping. It's not a kindness to whitewash, ignore, or erase a child's history. In the absence of information, they will attribute the reason for secrecy as their fault. And this worsens shame, weakens self esteem, it stirs fears, and it leaves kids floundering. So, this is not, I would hope, that adoption attuned parents would want. So, we talked about that at the beginning, this idea of truth seeking, truth telling, and truth speaking. And it builds trust, and trust builds connection. So that's why you'd be doing it. Discipline is part of parenting. Adoptive families will benefit from using adoption attuned discipline methods. All of us will make mistakes and sometimes behave badly. Children, parents too. Keep in mind that the purpose of discipline is to teach your child and help him identify how his behavior is out of bounds so he can learn from his misstep. So choose discipline methods that increase his respect for you rather than amplify his fear of you. Avoid activating his fear of rejection. This is why using time out as a way of helping a child calm down and reset their behavior is not recommended for adopted children. For them, time out may not only be ineffective, it may also harm the tender parent child bond you are working so hard to grow. Time out echoes rejection and tends to trigger an adopted child's fear of abandonment. Their immature brains will probably not recognize their removal as temporary. They often will begin fretting and anticipating a worst case scenario. Their drive for self protection will be triggered. Stress hormones will flood their bodies. Their thinking brain will be muted or inaccessible. Now, this may sound exaggerated. However, research has confirmed this troubling finding. So instead of time out, use time in. Stay close by and quiet until both of you have had time to calm down and stress hormones have diminished. Announce the timeout by saying something like, I'm calling time. Remember that I love you even though I'm angry with you. Then focus on calming yourself so that you can share your calm to reset his dysregulation. And be aware of your body language. Suppress any inclination to huff and puff and handle items roughly. By the way, when choosing parenting books, be sure that they appreciate adoption complexity and do not suggest methods that might damage your child's sense of safety. Parenting any child requires us to think ahead and plan for life's unexpected events. Sometimes we get too busy attending to life's daily routines and pressures that we might forget this important job of providing the everyday details of your child's routine that could be used by a potential caregiver. For those designated as caring for your children, or child, a list of adoption supports that you have used, including the names of the therapists, coaches, and or support groups. Also, include a list of what you would want the caregivers to look for in an adoption competent professional. Children's doctors and any medication that they are taking would be on this list. And maybe a summary of what types of responses, discipline, and activities work for your child. If they are of school age, you might want to include the IEP or other educational plan that they have, and maybe a name of a supportive educator in your child's life. Special notes about what kind of parenting techniques you do or do not want to have applied to your parenting your child would be a good thing to have on the list. And maybe a list of websites you found helpful in understanding your child or any diagnosis or special characteristics your child has. All this important information could be included right alongside your will. Something that you may not have thought about is to encourage playfulness and good humor as a family value. Fun is not the frosting on the cake, it's an essential component of relationship building. Sharing joy encourages attachment and connection. It weaves a tapestry of family memories and informs your family culture. Having fun together reinforces your children's desire to be with you and strengthens their willingness to listen, care about, and live by the values you espouse and the standards you set. Be intentional about creating fun. Notice what your kids enjoy as well as what bores them. Parent with a curiosity mindset. Get to know your kids better. This increases your knowledge and understanding of one another, strengthens your bond, and increases attunement. Scientific research affirms the importance of play. In his book, The Neurobiology of Attachment Focused Therapy, Dr. Dan Hughes says play and playfulness are essential components of treatment for children with blocked trust. So it's important to note that most adoptees experience some challenges in trust building, and Dr. Hughes' research is germane to adoptive parenting. Adopted children tend to default to protection in preference to connection. Their need for safety trumps their biological drive toward connection. This supercharged preference for safety arises as the response to their separation from their first parents. Wow, that's heavy, isn't it? But here's the thing, when you hear, watch me, mommy, look, daddy, look, Understand your kids are seeking attention and affirmation. They call out to be validated, to be seen, to be heard, and appreciated. This attention seeking is natural and healthy, and it's an essential part of that serve and return loop, which provides your children with a sense that they matter and are important to you. Ideally, you respond to their requests with a proud smile, a bit of encouragement, and the gift of your full attention. Now, sometimes you're busy and offer them only a half hearted murmur. That's not the end of the world unless it happens frequently. As long as you connect a lot more often than you brush them off, the relationship will succeed. We've established the importance of family fun and joy. How does this mesh with ensuring that we raise kids who behave, who are happy, who are well adjusted, understand right from wrong, know how to strive, and be a contribution to their family and their world? Sometimes you do need to focus on discipline, correcting your child's behavior or poor choices. But remember to prioritize your relationship. Or, as Dr. Karen Purvis advises, connect before you correct. Now that you have decided to adopt a child, you're beginning to realize that it will take a great deal of effort, time, commitment, and persistence to fulfill this life changing goal. Through our coaching experiences, we have found one question that people often do not think to ask themselves ahead of time. An important way to determine your parenting approach is to have a clear idea of your definition of how success will look. Ask yourself, what is my goal as a parent? You will also want to get clear on the core values that will guide your parenting. These will serve as the compass for all of your decisions throughout the adopting process, as well as through the years you actively parent your children. It's time to hear from Sharon Butler Obaze, our adoption coach, about her perspective as an adoptee. It's important to understand that she matured in her adoptive home and is a mother of three now adult biological children. Coach Sharon reflects, I look back on my childhood and realized my parenting style and attitude toward parenting began right there. My parents shaped my childhood with total control. Of course, they meant well, but they didn't allow any conversations about my birth parents, and a conversation about them felt inappropriate and unwelcome. They conveyed this in both verbal and nonverbal messages. Eventually, I became a mother of three children whom I single parented before meeting my husband. Following the example set by my parents, I parented with complete autonomy. I felt my role and responsibility as the sole provider said it all. After I married my husband, who was a willing co parent with me, I was reluctant to share my parenting role. Coach Sharon continues and says, I now understand how the lessons I learned as a child impacted my parenting. So I asked myself, how might I use my understanding of my learned behaviors to help adoptive parents rethink and expand the definition of parenting? For example, embracing the kinship network of both adoptive and birth families can provide perspectives that enhance the post adoption experience. When adoptive parents observe this benefit, it helps them value and welcome post adoption contact. Openness in adoption is becoming more and more accepted. Once you demonstrate a willingness to be flexible and consider your child's feelings, your parenting approach will be strengthened. This will foster a great deal of respect and deepen your relationship. Remember to be open in conversation. You need to be mentally and emotionally available. Be an active listener as your child speaks. Capitalize on bonding opportunities. Be intentional to create a stronger tie. Parenting is one of the most rewarding times in life, and adoptive parenting is also very complicated. It's a dance between acceptance and rejection. So don't take rejection personally. Take a deep breath, treat yourself with kindness. Remember that it takes time and patience to develop into a loving, caring, and attuned family. With every module, we pose one powerful question to ask yourself. So, how will your childhood experience within your family influence your parenting choices? In each module, we also ask you this series of important questions. After completing this module, what are you thinking about the most? What aspect of this module surprised you and why? And finally, how will you put what you learned in this module into action? And now, let's hear closing thoughts from each of our coaches. Coach Sally says, tell the truth to your children in an age appropriate manner. As you share, hold them in your heart as capable of carrying their own story. Coach Sharon reflects, it's amazing how much of what we learned as children from our parents can be passed on generationally. Take the time to understand your experiences. Coach Gale says the principles of adoption attunement serve as an excellent blueprint for adoptive parenting. And I round us out with my final thought. Most parents' proficiency and parenting skills increase over time. Yours will too, with intention and practice. What's next? Module 5, Understanding Your Adopted Child Better. We'll cover the 7 core issues of adoption and look at the gains and losses that all adoptive families face. Many references were used in this module. Please check them out to learn even more about the concepts we've explored here. This course was created by Growing Intentional Families Together. The information provided is not intended as medical, therapeutic, or legal advice. This presentation may not be shared or broadcasted without written permission. Address inquiries to us at giftcoach@giftfamilyservices.com.